Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you, David. And for those of you who don't know David, David is really one of the pioneers of executive coaching, really one of the people who I think have written so thoughtfully in inspiring ways about where we can find a life that matters. And that's what's so terrific to have an opportunity to talk with all of you about today here at Google. I feel like I've been in a Google office every week. I was just in Singapore and London and New York, and I'm on my way to Joburg. This is the front desk at Joburg Google. It's how's it, Jambo? And so I feel so welcome when I come here, and I love coming to Google because it's a particularly poignant time for me because I started on a passion play about 20 years ago where I was in a late night nightcap, I'll admit. It was 1 o'clock in the morning. We were in Switzerland. And we were jet-lagged and exhausted. And I was talking to a couple of famous Googlers. It was Larry and Sergey. They were at the World Economic Forum. And we were all just gushing about having met someone iconic in our lives that we never thought we would meet. It was one of his last public appearances. It was Nelson Mandela. And we were thinking about how this guy should have been the most angry man in Africa. And yet, what did he do with his life? He decided to reinvent a life that mattered for millions in rethinking the way that he could have impact and a sense of belonging for a culture. And that set me on a path that would be life-changing for me. I had been building businesses most of my career as an entrepreneur, and I decided that I wanted to pursue this question of how to create a life that mattered. Could we find the DNA? Could we find some ingredients by interviewing enough successful, high-achieving people around the planet? And could we unlock some of those secrets? Please come and sit down. I'm loving the opportunity also to be on live streaming. And for those of you who did get books and didn't get books, I'll make sure that you get free copies. So just ping me through the Google network. And for those that I might see in other cities, please let me know if you're interested. I'd love to share with you all the research that we learned about how to create a life that matters. And so here's where I want to go with that. I want to start with just a little piece of archival footage here of just the first 60 seconds of the first interview we did, starting in 1998, and I'm going to bring you to present, and then share with you 8 of the principles out of the 36 that we learned. And the 8 that I've picked is because they are the most, I think, hidden from our souls and from the public. They are the ones that aren't talked about, the ones that have the biggest impact. And let me share with you Herb Kelleher, kind of a famously happy guy who seems to have created a life that matters, even though he's really just running a discount airline.
Anything, to tell you the truth, they realized how confident I was. And they said, we can't have you handle anything that's really meaningful. But we like it. So what job are we going to get where you don't really have to do anything? And you can't really screw up the company badly, and so they made the chairman, president, CEO. Where you have to
Hey, how are you? So it was amazing to be able to meet people like Herb, who, in a sadly unusual way, when you meet CEOs, aren't necessarily the most happy people. And when you talk to him, you could see how that filters through the organization. How many of you have ever been on Southwest Airlines? Of course, yeah, we've all had to do that. You know, I was kind of coming here on Southwest Airlines, and I had the typical safety talk that you get on Southwest. Now, these people can't be paid all that much, not in money at least. But why is it that they're just a little happier, a little bit more engaged, maybe a little insane? Have you noticed this? We were like rolling out on the runway, and the flight attendant was giving us the safety talk. You know, nobody's listening. We're all reading our devices. He starts to pretend to be angry. He says, guys, if this plane falls out of the sky, would you like to know the documentation? You can hear the thud. You know, people are dropping everything. What's this guy up to? He says, OK, here's what's going to happen. If there's a change in cabin pressure or there's a crisis in the air, there are going to be the little yellow masks that pop out of the ceiling. Now, folks, those are oxygen masks. Now, don't start to ask, why is my mask smaller than his mask? Why is my mask inconveniencing the meeting that I'm supposed to hold? No, grab the mask. Put it on yourself first, and then put it on your child. And if you have more than one child, you might want to stop to consider which one really has the most potential. And that's what I want to talk about here, because this is how, when you talk to Herb, when we did that interview, he drank, I think, a full Scotch. The bottle was empty by the time we were talking 2 hours. Didn't seem to affect him a bit. He went through 2 packs of cigarettes. He was blowing it off screen. he said, you know, Mark, you know, people will not decide and choose explicitly and intentionally to live a life that matters. We have to take a moment and recalibrate. You know, we're not Nelson Mandela. There's probably many times during your life where you redefine what success means and what that definition of success is. So let's look at the factors that we discovered in this research. And one of them had to do with the fact that in a world that's so volatile and changing, we're all on this mission to find a sense of belonging, to create a life that matters. And the primary principle that seemed to flow through all of these came out of a research project, as I mentioned. And the project started with Built to Last. I don't know if you ever heard of Built to Last. You know, it was one of those great books, one of those many books that was a bestseller, and half of it was true. And I had the opportunity to be a part of the research team at Stanford that was working on this book, part of that slave labor that was doing all of the conjoint analysis. And Jerry Wynn at Wharton joined us, Howard Moskowitz at Harvard. Benita Thompson led the research. She's a behavioral psychologist. We worked with Jim Collins. And we then went on a survey of people who we thought had an impact for 20 years or more. In other words, the cohort that we went after were not people who were one-hit wonders or short-term success stories. We're talking about people who had impact for at least 2 decades. These were people who had been living a life that matters. And they might be celebrities, they might not be. Many of them were. I did have a very eclectic experience. It started with Nelson Mandela. I had the opportunity to meet Maya Angelou. I did many programs with her. The Dalai Lama, met the famous Googlers and the folks at Microsoft from the very early days. That just shows how, you know, this is going back to 1998 when Larry bought YouTube and was talking about that at the forum, into the present day. And the adventure ended up finding these criteria, 36 criteria in 2,000 interviews that we did. And then we did a survey in 110 nations to try to force rank what were these criteria on the definition of success. And what we found was that one of the great core competencies of people like yourself who have achieved is that you start to work at putting your demons in a place where you can perhaps harvest the energy from them. That it's a bit about mastering fear and ambition. And let me share with you a little bit what I mean about that. What we found was that people who have been able to find a connection with a life that matters tend to be great at failure. Winners lose often, and they lose more often than losers, because losers are usually trying to avoid the risk of making mistakes. That winners, people who have impact year in and year out, are usually experts at learning, at iteration, at being able to profit from failure and from change. And I don't know about you guys, I kind of often feel this way in all of my work. I always have way too much more to do than I possibly can, and shortcuts kind of never apply when we do this. So here's the first principle at work. We found that anyone who had really swung for the fences in high achievement had also failed big time. And they were experts at trying to harvest their failures. Let me give you just one exercise that we can all apply in how we would rethink any sort of disaster that we've ever been in. So Richard Branson, who was one of the early sponsors of this book, had a tragedy occur where he had been collecting 30 years of his notes in the family home on Necker Island, and it burned down 4 years ago, quite famously. A bolt of lightning came through the roof. He had been sleeping on the beach, and the house was filled with people. And his 90-year-old mom, Eve, was able to escort actually everybody out of the house when this big explosion occurred. And she's still bragging about it to this day, Eve is. And he said, I learned something really profound that day. Obviously, I was really worried about people being hurt. But then I realized how helpless I was in that disaster. I was down on the beach. He was starting to run to do the rescue, and he realized he wasn't fully clothed. He was barefoot. He ran straight into a cactus. It wasn't a pleasant experience for him. And he realized something that informed 30 years of his work that had gone up in smoke. And that is that if you did want to restart a life or a career or a business, do you think you would do that in exactly the same blueprint that you had leading up to that point of disaster? In other words, one of the greatest ways to think about looking forward in your life is to restart the old life. In other words, would you have the same blueprint for that house that you rebuild? Would you have that same work plan for your career? Or would you do things differently? Would you think about every aspect or process of your work or career in the same way? I don't think so. That one of the best ways we can think about our goal setting every year is to say, what if I were to start over? What would I do differently? How can I avoid just paving the cow path, as they say? Would it be the same team? Where is really, truly the value creation in our life and work? Think about that restart when you're doing your goal setting, rather than just thinking about incrementing yourself into the next thing you work on. Now, I'm going to give you some more tools to unpack this, but I wanted to start there because a lot of the work that we do and a lot of the effort that we put into the work that we do ends up being through inertia. And I hate this quote with Edison talking about failure, 10,000 ways that it didn't work. But the truth of the matter is that when we make effort and we are feeling like we're having a setback or we're humiliated from that effort, the truth of the matter is that the people who are continuing to have impact continue to do that and learn from that experience rather than allow themselves to be weighed under the pressures of it. That whenever he gets criticized, he thinks about the experience he has like this. Virgin, we have more experience than our name would suggest. That it's about iteration. It's about the capacity to be able to fail and move on. The second principle that we learned from this group of high achievers, like yourself, was that is there anyone in this room who's ever wanted to do something important in their life or work where others didn't approve of them? Of course. We've all had or continue to have constantly what we call the silent scream. What is it in your life or work that others who love you, who want to protect you, are trying to suppress or would hope that you make something of yourself so that you take another path in your life and work? This ends up being a very common pattern for all of us, and usually we tolerate it. In fact, we end up fueling it because we do the second piece of the silent scream. The first piece ends up being we're allowing others to perhaps deny that part of our life that we care about. And then secondly, we will often hide that passion as well. That's kind of our secret. It's what we don't want other people to trash because it's something that we love and something that we treasure. And then the irony of all this is that, quite frankly, people who love you can see right through the silent scream, right? The truth of the matter is it oozes out around all the edges. That when we do coaching with high achievers like yourself, we find all the time that there is that silent scream that's worth being aware of. It's worth trying to build a plan of safety around that silent scream. We're going to talk more about how to develop a safe way to pursue your silent scream. But here's a glimpse at how we found this cohort around the world in 110 nations started to deal with this. We didn't find any person who was doing something extraordinarily well who didn't have a portfolio of passions. There isn't just one thing to do with our lives. That usually there was a main expertise that was driven by an obsession, but there was always a portfolio of passions. Other parts of that silent scream that you tap, that feed you, that restore you, that allow you to recover, that allow you to become resilient, that allow you to, in a sense, create a more rich and full life that matters. There's an obsession, I think, now with expertise and being very precise about just what one area that we focus on. And what we found is that people who've had endearing lives of creativity and contribution have a silent scream that contributes to a portfolio of passions. And it's about putting a spotlight on what those are for you in your life. The third area that I found a bit ironic is that people who are high achieving have a paradoxical combination of both hubris and humility. In other words, hubris, you have to have people like my friend Gail Devers. She went to 4 Olympics. Now this woman, on the 4th Olympic, got a gold medal, and she lamented the fact that she hadn't broken the world record. I said, seriously, Gail? I mean, 4 Olympics? And what we found was that, on the one hand, she has this enormous hubris to believe that she can do so well at something, and the humility to realize that I always want to get better, and that nothing that I achieve can't be done without and through the efforts of others. That it's a combination of hubris and humility that drives people to have high impact. We talked to Sally Fields early on in the interviews that we were doing. She's one of the few women who've worked for 40 years on stage and screen, Emmy and Academy Award winning actress. Started out in meaningless roles, ended up doing very meaningful, high contribution work. Listen to how she describes her journey.
The only thing you have power over is to get good at what you do. That's all there is. That's all there is. There ain't no more. And the only way you become a leader, or any such, highfalutin terminology, a role model, a leader, give back, is to have something to give back. The only way you have something to give back is to go do something. Get off your rear end and go do something. And that doesn't mean I'm going to go, build a housing for the underprivileged, that's good too. But go become a doctor, a lawyer, an Indian chief. Go work your tail off and achieve something for yourself, some specific thing. But be excellent at what that is. That's the only way that you can be a leader. Who wakes up one day and says, shall I go to school or shall I be a leader? Let's see, what shall I do today? I think I'm going to go out and lead.
Nobody thinks that way.
It's a non-thing. It's a non-thing. That happens by accident. After you've pursued and struggled and kicked yourself around the block 400 gazillion times, and one day you look at it and you say, okay, I've done that, and people are turning to you and saying, lead us, you know. Huh?
On more than one occasion, I was delighted to have been really put in my place when I asked questions like, so how did you find that leadership journey as a woman on Hollywood? And she said, are you nuts? That's not how we go about a journey that matters. It's not about you. It's about each of us individually finding that silent scream and reaching in and having the humility and the hubris to make choices about moving towards that mission. And if it's ever not a struggle, then good for you. But what the people who are feeling their silent scream feeding them ends up being a very powerful combination of hubris and humility. I met Steve Jobs in high school. I was a freshman, he was a senior. There was a summer at Homestead High School where we met each other in a place, well, I shouldn't even tell you, but I was in the principal's office with him. And I won't tell you why we were there so long or had such an opportunity to bond. But I will tell you that it was interesting to hear him talk about his dreams. And at that time where I was in my life, all that was frightening to me. To hear his hubris and his sense of ambition and creativity, there was no way I was going to chase him. This is not a story of me spending time in that garage and becoming a billionaire. There was no way I could possibly surrender at that point to the seduction of what he already had, which was clarity about that silent scream. Later, I would have the privilege of meeting him as Steve 2.0 because at that point in my career, by 1999, I was chairman of a company that invented this little thing. Anyone know what that is? Yeah, an MP3 player, right, exactly. But I'm very proud of the fact that while other technology is all turned over in the last 25 years, nobody would think that would still be on your device, but it's on pretty much everybody's device today still, the MP3 player, the audio. I was chairman of that little startup company, and I was giving a speech at Stanford, and Steve Jobs was going through his resurrection, and he came up to the front and he said, Mark, you're an idiot. This is a geeky piece of crap, and we're going to crush it in about 2 years. You want to come work for me? What a recruiting. This was Steve 2.0. Don't let that attitude ever be an excuse to you. I don't know how many leaders tell me, well, Steve behaved that way. I said, well, there's an outlier. Once we disrupt 4 different industries, then maybe we have the privilege of being that kind of personality. But even he had started to recognize that it wasn't about him anymore. He was going to have to recruit A players from so many different fields, that it was always about staying hungry and staying foolish enough, that this time he wasn't going to lose his company again. But it's interesting to see, and I say this with the greatest and love respect, because I had an opportunity to work with him over a 3-year period. He'd come a long way as a leader, but when you think about, what was it, just last week? Apple became the most valuable company in the world, broke $1 trillion. They had already been the most valuable company in the world, but it wasn't until 2011, in his passing, that the company went on to become the most valuable in the world. And it was interesting how his transformation certainly contributed to the inertia in that company, but he didn't turn all of his wounds into wisdom. This guy did. Chuck Schwab, being fiercely independent, having this hubris, but then also being set back by dyslexia. When I met him, he talked about how there was no way that he could have built a company if it hadn't been by finding people who had the strengths that he lacked. And it turns out at Stanford Business School, he ended up being one of the people who most quickly scaled a business out of business school because he never thought he was the smartest guy in the room. He always chose to recruit a team around him that could do the things that he couldn't. He put his life's work, his silent scream, turned it into passions, and then instantly recruited a team to that dream. Who else could contribute to that dream and those sets of passions in ways that they owned, in ways that they could make a unique contribution? of their own independent impact. Listen to how Chuck talks about this. This is another piece of archival. How'd you go about coping when you went on to college and started your career? How did you get through college?
I got through college by by a lot of luck, and sometimes I think even mirrors, because I flunked English A couple of times at Stanford, and it was a very debilitating, depressing thing for me to do that, because I thought I was pretty bright, and I didn't realize how incompetent I was in the skill of writing. In some respects, the positive side of this learning issue thing was probably my early recognition that I wasn't strong in every component of reading and writing, all those kinds of things, that I needed to have other people who could help me out in different parts of the business that I was developing. A lot of people who are brilliant, we'll say, who are brilliant entrepreneurs, think they can do everything, and they don't develop the team that they need to have in order to accomplish the various levels that you're going to reach in your growth curve as a successful company. And so at every level this Schwab has moved to, I've been able to, I think, recognize my strengths and my deficits and build up around me with great people in the deficit area. And I think that probably has been maybe the single most important benefit that I achieved or received from having this learning issue early on in my life. So it's a little perverse in some respects, but at least that's the way I rationalize it.
One of the best bosses I've ever had. Spent 12 years working at his side. Really informed the way I decide now. Whenever I think about what I want to do next, I always think about who. Don't just think what, think who. Think about the community of people who might share that value, might be able to contribute to it in ways that would be profound for them as well, in their own unique characteristics. This works as well in organizations as it does with your individual passions. Always recruit a team to that dream that you have. And he did this in such a beautiful way, and with dyslexia now, he's one of the leaders who is really changing the way we think about learning. He's got a wonderful foundation called All Kinds of Minds, finding geniuses everywhere with every type of learning that's out there. I suffered a disability early in my life, an eyesight disability, which made it profoundly difficult for me to read even up until middle school. So whenever I'm introduced as a New York Times bestselling author, I always kind of go, you talking about me, David? Because that was always my struggle. I could tell stories well, but that eyesight issue made it difficult with motor skills and certain cognitive processes until I got through adolescence. And it was one of the things that called me to the work that I do today in terms of executive coaching, because I always felt that everyone had their own form of genius, that maybe there are A and B players, but truthfully it's more about A alignment, finding the things that we're profoundly gifted at and be able to contribute that with other people around us. Turning your wounds into wisdom. Principle number 5 that's important, and I'd love for you to ask yourself this question if you could today. The people who have lives filled with happiness and joy, people who have lives that are filled with meaning, take a moment each day or each week and shine a spotlight on who and what in their life and work is working. And one of the takeaways I'd love for you to do when you leave here today is to think of somebody to thank. I've got Karen May here of People Development at Google, who's encouraged me to do this work and encouraged me to go around the world with Googlers to think about this. I have David as a dear friend now who's developed these last couple of years. You'll be getting a note. I still have every note that Chuck Schwab and Steve Jobs ever wrote me. I'll never throw that away. Just think about the last note that you wrote to somebody. Write one. Send that email. It doesn't take that much effort to thank someone, and it makes a profound difference. Cognitively and emotionally and how it touches you. Some people call that gratitude, but that sounds corny to me. I'm really talking about who and what works in your life. It was really Richard Branson who's continued to support this work for my co-author, Benita Thompson, and my daughter, who's kind of a half Googler. The work that she did at an internship here at 18 changed her life. I want to thank you guys at Google for having such a profound impact on my daughter, because she's now a STEM major. She went from being a political science major, which she was planning to go to school, and she's now at Berkeley Math. And she's pursuing a Haas degree next. So thank you for the contribution you made to her life. See how good that feels to be able to say something like that? The The principle of having a place that's safe to tinker came up over and over again in all 110 nations, no matter who we talked to as achievers. There was always a safe place for a garage. And I call this a garage because if you think about Silicon Valley, we're filled with garages which don't have cars. I don't know about you, but when I was growing up, I never visited a garage that had a car in it. What would you put a car, unless you're inventing a car, why would you put a car in a garage? This was a safe place to tinker and create a new dream or build something or do that craft project. And you know, if it wasn't good enough to show the world, nobody needed to know. If it wasn't good enough to leave the garage, it didn't leave the garage. And so what's interesting in organizations and in the businesses that I've helped build and in the lives that I've helped support, you need a place to tinker. Where's your garage? It's amazing. Just across the bay at Pixar, I work with Jim Morris over there. It's amazing to see how they have safe places to tinker on massively expensive creative projects like films. At Pixar, as you know, if you read Ed Catmull's book, I think one of the very best leadership books around in thinking about creating a life that matters is to read Creativity, Inc. Because he talks about that place where you brainstorm and it's completely safe. This is a brainstorming room. And you never criticize anybody's ideas in that brainstorming room. You plus it up. You add to it. If you're going to be critical, you're out of there. You've got to be able to build on, pile on in a new way. So where is your community of, or your mastermind for the dream that you want to follow? Is there a safe place to do that and have people come and pile on ideas? And then at least at Pixar, they realize they have to run a business, so then they take it to another room to say, okay, now we're going to deconstruct the crime here, set priorities, which are, that's miserable. I hate setting priorities. You know, no entrepreneur wants to decide which goes and which stays and what's done now and what's done next. And then they have a third room where they operationalize things. That's the business school that has to be practiced in order to run a business. So try to think about a sense of place. We're all, as humans, the environment does win. We do this at Google in terms of having creative spaces. But remember, if you can have a place that you designate that's safe to create, safe to incubate, and safe to deliver, that's really important. We found it coming up over and over again. Another principle that we found in this cohort of high achievers was that they, like we talked earlier about the silent scream, anyone here have a secret fear that they've run across? We all have different phobias and fears that we've had to face. Can I give you a stupid one for me? It's pretty safe to tell this crowd about just having a fear of heights and roller coasters. I've still, even to this day, never been on a roller coaster, not of any consequence at least. And this was hard when I became a daddy because I would walk my daughter to the Matterhorn at Disney and I'd hear the screams of delight and I'd hear her screams of delight. She looked like this little one here and we'd walk closer and closer. And I'd be melting down and feeling my hands getting sweaty. And by the time we got just up to deliver her and put her on the ride, I'd say, Daddy's got to take a call. Mommy's going to ride with you. And that's what we do every time. You know, it's just like she saw through that. She saw through that very quickly. Well, one of the things that I'm embarrassed to say that I didn't really discover until this year, is an understanding in this data that I've been collecting for 20 years. And it was around this idea that often people who are high achievers, they may or may not face a fear down, but they almost never think about it as being a potential source of joy. If we could prepare for it. What if there was some way that we could somehow prepare for this difficulty in our life in a way that there just might be some shred of joy that comes from it, that might be an unlock for me? And there ended up being one for me in this particular case. I decided that, yes, okay, I was going to be ambitious here, I was going to toughen up, I was going to face my fear, I was going to take a group of my clients. It was the founder of Pinterest, the CEO of HP and the staff. We rented a zero-G plane. And we went up in the so-called vomit comet. And what they do is they rent 10 miles by 100 miles of the stratosphere. And they do 15 parabolas. And you know, down you're doing 3Gs, and up you're doing, well, 0G. And it was some macho thing in me that said, oh, I just have to do this. You know, forget the roller coasters or the skydiving. I'm going to prepare for this. Now, I'm 20 years older than everybody who's on the plane. So I trained rigorously for this. I started studying, why is it that you get nauseous? Mark, why do you get vertigo? It's interesting. I'd never leaned into my fear. I'd never studied. What do we know about people who have fear of heights? Why do I have this fear? How could I address this fear? I guess I could go to therapy, but then that would be just a cycle. I wasn't really coaching myself. I wasn't a very good student. So I deconstructed this fear. Now, I'm not saying I conquered it. I don't think that's true. think what you do is you actually managed it, but I never thought that I might harvest it. So I ended up going up in the vomit comment because, and I was thinking this all along. I was thinking about the roller coaster ride. I'm not going to be like Ryan was in that movie. But I was going to try to find a way to go into zero G.
Perfect. Look at me, Mark.
Well, that was fun. I would do that every day of the week. Something that was doing something I can't imagine anything more frightening than to deal with looking out into the stratosphere and looking from dark to light and plunging like that. I stayed on the course. I stayed very disciplined about what they asked me to do, but I never expected to enjoy it. What fears do we have in our life that are holding us back? That there might be just the shred of an unlock that we are worthy of leaning into and learning more about. That's something I never thought I would explore for myself before. And I would see it, I observed it, and I've been hearing people tell me this for 20 years and never internalized it until this year or found a way to exercise it. You learn throughout life. I'm hitting my 60th birthday here and finding a new joy that I missed for that last 60 years. Now I'm feeling greedy. What else have I missed about what makes life special and what makes life so rich and creative? And this is what is unique about this cohort of people that I found who continue to reevaluate how to create a life that matters and look at success. So let's deconstruct that one level further here in the final piece. I want to ask you folks, if a loved one came to you not knowing anything about what you do for a living, but they're loved ones, could be a child or a parent, and asked you, what's your definition of success? What would you tell them? Just at the highest level. What would be your definition of success? Anyone here? There's no right answer. Anyone? David, what would be your definition of success?
That the people I love me and are better human beings because of that.
Is that a lovely definition of success? Give them a round of applause. That's beautiful. That's beautiful. That the community that I care about is better off because we're together and that we've contributed to that community. Anyone else? What would be another definition of success? Yes?
A combination of strong connections with people in my life and fulfillment.
Fulfillment.
And hobbies. Yeah.
And being able to do some of those passions that maybe we talked about, maybe fewer silent screams. Give them a round of applause. That's a great definition that you could find another part of your life that you, yes? Happiness, what a concept to come with success. And that would be dividends of both of these others. That's a great definition. Give her a round of applause. Success. Any other definitions of success? Anything else that comes to mind? She was doing her hair back there, so you won the bid. What would be your definition?
Well, it's not my definition, but a definition associated would probably be wealth, fame, prestige.
Yes, exactly. So this is an interesting point that we'll make. So if you look up the definition of success in the dictionary, which actually didn't occur to me to do 20 years ago when we started the research, but our Wharton team said, if we're going to publish this book with Prentice Hall, we got to do the research. Look in the dictionary. That was the definition in the dictionary. But that's it. The definition that we heard from people who had high impact in their lives and had developed lives that truly matter for them and others didn't have wealth, fame, or goals actually on the list. So what we teach our kids or feel conflicted about, one of the reasons the silent screen is so profound is because we have a double standard on how we define success in every language, by the way. If you can find another one, I'll send you a nice bonus. If you can find a way that the definition of success is defined anywhere else. It's a punishing, evil definition of success, frankly, because it's not how successful people who've had lives that matter long periods of time define success. In fact, the definition of success, I shouldn't be surprised, and I hear this at Google, wherever I go in the world, and I've now asked people live in meetings like this, 15,000 people. They define the success the same way that you did in this room. And it ends up being characterized this way. And the thing I want to say about this is also for you to notice, you should never assume that you know somebody's definition of success. There's more than one definition. I'm not sure that your definition of success might have been the same even 5 years ago. to check in to find out what a person's definition of success is. You might be profoundly touched by how they frame it. If knowing that about David or knowing that about how you sense this connection with your passions makes a difference in your relationship with that person, how they define that success. There's not just one to do it. What we found was that there's 3 categories of the definition of success. All 3 of these were present in everyone who'd had impact for 20 years or more. They had a sense of purpose or a cause, something that they were associated with that was greater than themselves but that they believed in, that they cared about. They had a sense of passions and connection. They had a sense of who they wanted to be with through their purpose, but also through their hobbies and through their passions and through the work that they wanted to do. And then they also had a way of actually wanting to deliver on the goods. I mean, it's one thing to be purpose-driven, but it's hard to really earn the right to do that unless you can deliver on some of your promises. This was what we'd call the genius of the and rather than the tyranny of the or. That when you're feeling out of balance, it's not just because you can't do enough of the one thing that you love. It's because we're often not doing things that we can see connected to something bigger than us or a community bigger than us, and that also feeds our passions. The passions are about things that we would do on our own. They're not about winning. They're about doing something we believe in, that we want to refine. That's something that we want to be a part of. Performance has to do with our ability to deliver on those things. And what I'd love to do right now is just serve you a set of definitions around passion so you can mine this a little deeper. So what we found is that there are really 6 dimensions of passion. And the reason I have Maya Angelou and Warren Buffett up here is because when I went to visit Maya Angelou, she talked about how most of us don't live our lives feeling all 3 of these. That it's easy to maybe focus on one but not the other 2. That when we're feeling out of balance, it's because we haven't decided, wait, okay, so how is this connected to something bigger than me? Or longer term. Some people might even call this a legacy. And you know, this could be a community. It doesn't have to. It could be a company. It could be a customer. Just something bigger than ourselves. Passions are for you. Performance is how we deliver and express all of those. So let's go through purpose, passion, and performance. But one thing about Warren Buffett won't accept a job inquiry from an individual unless they qualify for all 3 of these. He says a lot of people will have a sense of how they've served a business or a purpose in the past. They'll express maybe how they've delivered in terms of performance. But when it comes to passion, most people put that off and don't integrate that in with their work. That passion is not something you should put off to another time and needs to be a part of your everyday work. He said that passion, to put off your passions is a little bit like saving up sex for old age. It's a really bad idea. We should be living full out right now. And I said, good for you, Warren. I want to be that way when I'm 80, right? The Oracle of Omaha says that we should be living full out, and so should so does the poet, as she expresses her life. So let's look quickly at passion. Passion, we found this portfolio of passions we talked about. You can look at this set of passions in the sense that one of the ways to evaluate whether you're doing something you're passionate about is that you will lose sense of time. Mikhail Csikszentmihalyi, the social scientist, would call experts in their field, whether they were artists or chemists, and say, how long have you been working on the project? Don't look at a watch. They could never say. Your unconscious competence, you will lose that when you're in the flow. Ever been in the flow? You're doing something else and it starts to contribute to answering the question. As soon as you let go of the problem, you're running, you're reading, you're doing your favorite knitting, then it starts to flow for you. So think when you watch the flow, that's usually an indication of passion. We tend to have a bias when it comes to defining failure, that generally when you're doing something you're passionate about, it's not a failure, it's a learning. We redefine it. I used to run and play music in high school. I don't run anymore because I wasn't that good at it, so I failed at that, but I'm still playing the horn even though I wasn't that good at it. But I'm learning. I'm getting better and better. I'm still trying to be creative that way. We tend to be proactive and do the things we're passionate about first. We like to think we're objective, but we have decision bias. The things that get at the top of the list are generally the ones that we feel the most passionate about. I'm geeking over this because I'm not a behavioral psychologist. I really wanted to look at how the behavioral data, when we did a forced ranking, and we asked people in this conjoint analysis to determine what they really cared about, these were the dimensions of passion. That passion is something you'd secretly do for free. Now, I know Google is a business, but we're all hopefully driven not just by the clock, right? We're driven with doing something, some aspect of the day. I mean, life is short, but some days are very long, right? Not everything we do is something we love, and it's not what I'm really proselytizing here. What I'm saying is that there needs to be some aspect of the work we do that feeds us, even without traditional compensation. You bore people when you're passionate. So you go to a party, and if somebody asks me about my daughter, please don't make this mistake. I will not shut up. You'll be looking at me saying, I'm so happy for you, Mark. They're looking at their watch. They feel the aging process. They don't know how to get out of the conversation. Mark is still geeking over it. You're not politically correct or socially conscious entirely when you're in a state of passion, when you're living your passion. Now, this is an important way to deconstruct relationships, because it's good to know what's flipping somebody's switch so that you can either feed that for them or help align them with that on a project or help associate with them if you share that passion. This is another dimension of it. You definitely bore people when you're passionate about something. And it's also something that you would hope that in history that you'd like to be remembered for. It usually is the kind of thing that, gosh, I'd love to say that the passions that I've been living and the purpose I'm feeling could somehow be remembered, that somehow would be a part of my legacy, that could somehow maybe make a difference. And that would make a life worth living. I do spend some considerable time up at Nike, and what's the slogan at Nike that's most famous? Wouldn't you love to have a slogan like that? Everybody in any language, it always comes back, just do it in English. Why is that so compelling? Kind of cuts through the clutter and the bullshit of our lives and the pressure and the denial that comes from other people about what we really want to do. We just want to do it. But we don't want to just do anything. We want to do something that matters. I love the current positioning that they have right now. They talk about trying to find your inner athlete, whether you are an athlete or not, and to play to be remembered. I think what we'd all love to feel is that somehow the impact and the creativity and the meaning that we found in our life would mean that we had played and to be remembered, that we were writing our own future. That would be perhaps the most profound way to think about our lives. I'd like you to all just stand up for a moment. I asked you the definition of success, and I just want to make a closing request of you all, and then we'll do some Q&A. I asked you a moment ago your definition of success. And you were processing this and hoping I wasn't going to call on you. And as you were doing that, I'd like to now invite you to think about the fact that the success that you've achieved is not entirely yours. It's also because there's a contribution from others. That there's other people in your life and your work that have helped make you successful. Isn't that right? It's not just about you. So could you try to picture in your mind for a moment someone in your life or work who's somehow contributing to the success that you've enjoyed in your life? Can you get that picture in your mind? If that person was trying somehow to get through Google security and was now being arrested at the front door, do you think you could make a noise so loud to alert them all that they should let he or she in? Do you think you could make a noise so loud in this room that you could indicate how much you love this person? 1, 2, 3, on the count of 3, you're going to give me a noise so loud that you're going to have them released from security. 1, 2, 3, go! Okay, very nice. Please sit down. That's great. That's great. They're letting them through now. Could you check on that, Mitch? Yeah. I wish I'd had somebody there this morning when I was trying to get in. The reason I did that is because there's so few times in our life and work that we really show that level of gratitude to the people that mean the most to us. Would you promise me one thing, that when you leave here today, that you could let those few people who qualified for that mental list of success know that you gave them a shout out today, as corny as that may be? That'll make your day better. That'll make you feel profoundly better. And it's what the most creative, high-impact people do. Thank you so much. I'd love to take questions. Thank you.
Hi, Mark. Thanks. So,
sure.
Yeah, there's the 3 Ps, and I feel like certain ones come easier to me than others. And
damn straight.
Yeah. So
absolutely.
Getting stuff done or performance.
Yep.
Sure.
Yeah.
But the whole there's the passion and then there's the
purpose. Yeah.
Purpose. Okay, so the purpose one.
Yeah.
I can sort of think through it, but it's not natural. How does it come to you? Is it really a thought process, or it's like really centering and it comes from the heart? Have you heard of people struggling with that?
Yes, absolutely. And I think we have to reaffirm kind of what we believe in and reevaluate that probably at many different points in our life and in our career. What we found is that the process that many people go through is to try to get a sense of what their purpose might be by looking at their career over time and seeing what are the proudest moments that you have. And in your personal life, what were the proudest moments that you have? What were the ones that give you the most energy on reflection? Lay it out in a timeline. And one of the ways that you can observe that list is to start to deconstruct what would be the 3 or 5 reasons in terms of purpose of that work that you were doing. Frame it that way, that it gave you that response. But start with what gives you a sense of pride. Now, I'm grossly oversimplifying a much deeper process that we can talk about. But the idea is to say that are those areas of your life that you're the proudest about kind of feeding a sense of purpose in any way? They may also be feeding a sense of passion and some of the things that you just like to do for your own sake. And it helps separate it from a moment from achievement. Because usually when you answer this question of proud of most moments, you probably already tick the box for performance. We're, especially in Western society, very much trained towards outcomes and achievement. And we are programmed for that. That's part of the silent scream. If there's something that we love that's not achievement-oriented, that's probably in the silent scream category. It's one of those hard things to resurrect into your active portfolio of passions that you have.
It's very easy to define success looking back. So like, I don't know, like if Larry started out with the mission of organizing the world's information, or Zuckerberg started out with, organizing with like connecting the world.
The revisionist history of the past, right?
Yeah. So looking forward, like how do you, define your mission, or like how do you know what you are passionate about? Because honestly, I don't know what I'm passionate about at this point.
It's because of a lot of inertia that we often lose track of what we feel that we're most passionate about, which is why I would love to, I can send to you, and you'll also find in the book, or if you didn't get a copy of the book, we can send that to you. I'd be happy to send that free. The criteria around passion, because you can explore some of those areas that speak to you, those areas that you find that you are talking about a little bit too long with a loved one, the category of areas where you find yourself spending time when you're not working. Is there something you're naturally being gravitated to? What are those areas that you are not putting a spotlight on now because they're not achievement-oriented or outcome-oriented? Is there anything that you particularly look forward to in the work that you're doing right now? What aspect of it do you hate? What aspect do you love about that? I often go through a process where it's more interesting to look at what you hate and see why you hate it. And you think that's a really dumb idea. Why would we look at the things that we consider a failure and hate the most? Because what's shocking is, if you share that with 3 other people, they may not agree with you as being that's the worst thing that ever happened to them. What's so shocking in the work that I do among high achievers is that I'll just assume that the things that people love are this and the things that they hate are that. And I'm wrong every single time. That a person might say, gosh, well, what I hate about this is that nobody knows that I did the work and I'm not getting recognition. And so I don't feel significant here unless I have a speaking part. And the next person over who's a high achiever will say, what I hate most about this is I have to get up every time and speak about this. I can't stand being in front of a crowd. So to deconstruct what it is that you hate so much, and I call this kind of ballast. The things that are, if you were to look at the high points in your life, the proudest moments, and the worst moments in your life, and just spend an extra moment looking at why you hate the things you hate, there's probably, if you flip that into energy, if you flip that into why it's holding you down, you'll get the insight into something that could be really miraculous in your life. So my wife, who is my co-author on all of this work, her brother died when he was 21. He was already bicycling over to NASA, a savant, a genius. And you might ask 3 people, obviously the loss of a brother when you're 18 and he's 21 particularly would be so profoundly impacting your life. And you'll almost find as many reasons in this room why that's a bad thing as there are people in this room. But for her, the greatest loss was the lack of contribution that he would have. The world lost a genius. That's probably not the first thing the next 3 people would say. So what did that do to inform what she cherishes and believes in? I'm going to spend my life, I realize that's what I care about. I'm projecting it on all the other important people in my life. So she spends her life trying to create a life that matters for others. For me, I was held back because of a developmental disability. I never now assume. a person's intelligence or capacity until we actually work together to try to unlock what that is. Because everybody has a certain form of genius. And the most key part of innovation is to try to unlock that particular genius. I have endless patience for that, because if I didn't, I wouldn't believe in myself. It's a personal projection of that passion. Yeah.
Thank you for this very inspirational talk. So the common definition of success is a bit money, fortune, fame, power, and all that. And I can tell from your talk, like you and your friends probably enjoyed a lot of that. But meanwhile,
no, we're all losers. We're just losers.
Yeah, but meanwhile, do you agree that a majority of people just don't have those? Majority of people are just common people.
Yes.
You know, my son also goes to Homestead High. And I try to inspire him, say, hey, look at Steve Jobs, you know, he's so great job now. He said, Dad, he was just an exception. I'm a normal kid.
Yes.
And I thought, that makes sense. So
it's a fair point, right?
Yeah. Do you think that for common people, it's also important to find the satisfaction and content from just doing normal things?
Yes,
just be content with what we got.
Absolutely.
Just for a plain job at Google.
If that's what you value. Yeah. Yeah, you're definitely a very normal, underprivileged Googler. Because that'll, you know, that sets the bar a certain place that is maybe a little also privileged. The point of all this really is that it's for each and every one of us to find our purpose, our passion, and performance. The only reason I use the famous examples is because you know them. And because I was shocked at how inadequate each and every one of them were to the task that they were faced with. And yes, maybe they're the long tail or the unicorn, but each and every one of us are a unicorn. That really what we should be looking at, the standard that we're setting, the standard that you're setting at Google for your son, is that he live a life that matters to him. Nobody else can make that decision for him. And that's the silent screen. So your job is to say, not to talk about Steve Jobs because he's actually a terrible role model. Is to talk about what's so special about him that he lays up at night thinking about, that he's afraid to talk to you about, that you could empower so he could be lighting up the sky with that work. It may not be politically correct. He may not become a doctor or a lawyer, but he might end up being the best creator. He might be the best inventor. What could you feed? Jane Goodall would lose the daughter at she was 4 years old. She'd wander off and she'd look for hours for her daughter, and her daughter would be found there. She was looking at the lizards. And she was looking at the bugs. Well, that wasn't a politically correct profession in a family that had all doctors and lawyers. And she became Jane Goodall. So there's a shred of a place of joy and contribution, and that's what we as parents are so challenged to find. Yes.
There was a quote earlier, something about winners and losers, and like winners lose more than losers or something.
Yeah.
I was just wondering, how would you define losers?
Yeah, no, it's not a fair, I'm glad you pointed it out, because I'd be supremely disappointed if I didn't get called on that. So thank you. Give her a big round of applause. So if there's any great exception, I think, to the way this is presented, you'd never talk about winners and losers. The reason I did that, though, is for a very specific reason, and that is that if you talk to people who, if you didn't know that they had had some celebrity or additional success, you'd find that they spent more airtime talking on their failures than on their successes. That they were learning from, iterating towards an outcome that they were seeking. The point I was really trying to make there is that we fail more often than we succeed if we're really trying hard at something we care about. And that's okay. In fact, that's the only way to fail forward to success. Usually 10 times more losses than wins for people who are trying to do something meaningful. Yeah.
If you feel like you don't have a silent scream, is it better to A, hope it comes organically, B, cultivate one that you want to have, or C, just kind of give up on the idea that you'll matter?
It sounds like a standard Google bubble test. Isn't there a D? All of the above or none of the above? It doesn't have to be so much a silent scream. I mean, the good news might be, do you enjoy your work?
Moderately. But
moderately.
Like I enjoy everything moderately. So like there's nothing that's like a peak or a low.
Okay, so it's a matter of starting to notice whether there's peaks or lows. Starting to notice the things that really irritate you the most. because there might be the germ of something you really care about there. So I have good friends who, are just offended if they see bad code. I have friends who are offended if they see a bad ad written. These are insights into maybe she should be spending some more time doing copywriting on ads. And that's not something you've ever been offered in your life, most likely. It's so amazing to me being a late parent and having my daughter go to a great school like Berkeley, but it's interesting asking the kids, so what do you want to do and why do you keep changing your mind? It's because, Dad, we never got asked a choice. We were never offered an opportunity to test new ideas out, right? That's not what you're really allowed to do. Pass the AP test, right? Get the performance done. So things do end up getting kind of mediocre. Like I like everything kind of moderately well because I did get A's in those classes. But you really haven't been offered this opportunity now to step back for a moment, look at the things that are your highs and your lows. You'll start to see some of them. And if you do some more reading about the passion test, you're going to find that some of those areas do activate you more than others. Some you're better at. Some of those speak to you more. And that might be a way to start to find a way to lean into those ideas. Thank you, everybody. Appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you.